Guyana is now a full-fledged oil-producing nation. But how much do you know about this valuable yet finite resource? On our radio program, Guyana's Oil and You, we strike at the heart of every issue with informed views and credible data. The time is now for you to arm yourself with insightful knowledge on your oil wealth. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's episode of Guyana's Oil and You. I'm your hostess, senior journalist at Kaieteur News, Kiana Wilberg. And given that today is International Anti-Corruption Day, tonight's focus will be a reflection on some of the challenges in the oil industry that hinder transparency and accountability. For tonight's discussion, we have three distinguished gentlemen. We have Dr. Troy Thomas. He's the former president and serving member of Transparency International Guyana Inc., TIGI. And we have the current president of TIGI, Mr. Fred Collins. Also joining us is Mr. Darsh Kusial of Oil and Gas Governance Network. Gentlemen, welcome to the program and thanks for making the time to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kiana.
Thank you, Kiana.
All right. So without further ado, I'd like to start off with my first question going to Mr. Collins. Now, Mr. Collins, I'm sure you would have heard over the years several criticisms about the extent to which certain provisions in the Stabroek Block Production Sharing Agreement leave the lion's share of the oil wealth for ExxonMobil and its partners. But based on your observations, what's your take on what the contract really does or its effect, and how do you believe it supports or undermines transparency?
Well, to answer the first part of the question, I certainly agree that the lion's share appears to be in the hands of the oil companies. All one has to do is to see on the surface of it, we are getting 2% when Suriname is getting 8%, and even 8% by comparison with other contracts around the world looks kind of small. Now, the problem with those who say, never mind, that's not the right comparison. The problem with that is that you have to be very bright. You can't be an average human being in order to appreciate the comparison in their heads. And any contract like that, by its very nature, will be intransparent because only some very gifted people can understand how it is redundant to the benefit of the government. You have to be very, very smart. And that in itself is in transparency to a large extent. But to answer the more general question, as you probably realize, what we at TIGI have been saying, because we left the accounting elements to those who know more accounting than we do. We at TIGI don't have the kind of resources to duplicate effort. So we left that to people like Chris Ram, who is also a member, and he has done a pretty good job. And we noticed that nobody was examining the contract itself. And in fact, we asked for help. And we were told that for such a large document, somebody will have to give us some financial encouragement, let's put it that way. And we never got the kind of help. So we were left to plot through it ourselves. And as we went through it, certain things became very, very clear. And one of those was what we call the original sin. And that original sin was the wholesaling of the blocks, which the law does not allow. Um, the law required and still does that the maximum amount of blocks that could be awarded on a single license, This is something that, apparently some people don't understand. There is no limit to how to that area that could be given to any a single oil company. You can give all 26,800. That's not a problem to the same company. But if you do so, you must give it in the parcels, the maximum parcels, the maximum area for each license. That's a huge problem. And that is what was not done. And because of that, there are several advantages that we have given away. One of them, for instance, is that we just saw, we seem to have missed a date for auditing. Had we done it in the 6, because it would have been 6 separate licenses that would have been required. Had we done it in 6 separate licenses, then what would have happened? 2 things would have followed naturally. One is that there would have been, by the laws of averages, different licenses falling due on different dates, perhaps during the year. Of course, it could have happened that all were arranged to fall on the same day, but we're talking about natural, how things normally happen. And so what would have happened is that all those due dates would not have fallen together. Even if you missed one, you would have. The other thing that would have happened is, even if you had 2% and it was felt that the 2% was small, as we certainly think, then the 2% would have applied to one license. Perhaps you could have had 2% to all of them, but we would have had a division of all the exposure that we are with one contract. And in terms of the ring fencing that we're talking about, apart from the dates of by the laws of averages falling at different times, the ring fencing, we know that no ring fencing was provided for. But if you had separate licenses, it would have been difficult, abnormal for the oil company to claim, let me take from this license, from this license that was not producing properly, to claim the expenses. Sorry that we didn't find any that was not commercial, and claim the expenses for another license that was. So that would have provided a ring fencing of sorts to the whole thing, and that was lost when we did what we did. And we're the only ones who've been making this point. Apparently, this has been a difficult issue for a lot of people to recognize. Over to you.
Thank you very much for that perspective there. I noted that you pointed to 2 key issues that have been raised actually by other stakeholders, such as Mr. Ram, who you said is also part of Transparency International Guyana Inc. And that has to do with ring fencing, as well as the fact that we gave more blocks than the law actually permits. So on that note, I'd like to ask Dr. Thomas, what are some of the issues with this arrangement that we have in this contract that have bothered you, and what do you want to see done about it?
Well, there are several issues with it. Fred alluded to some of them. The whole overarching thing is that I believe we treated this like a petroleum hustle rather than a matter of looking after our patrimony. we did not consider intergenerational equity and intergenerational justice. We wanted some fast cash, and we were willing to give away the wealth for future generations in order to get that fast cash. And when you listen to the conversation and the justifications that people put forward, even to this day, that's what you're getting. We're not thinking beyond, look what we can do in terms of infrastructure right now, look what we can do in terms of building this and that and the other, but not recognizing that whatever natural resources we have belong to all Guyanese, even future Guyanese. And if we think about it that way, then we would want to step back and make sure we get things right. We'll want to make sure we maximize the value that's returned to Guyanese. We'll follow the law because the laws are there to ensure that certain things are done properly. And so while I mean the views that I have on the contract are consistent with what Fred would have said, I wanted to put that perspective as an explanation for why we might have a perspective where we want to see these things happen, and we're not enticed by what we can get tomorrow in terms of cash flow. And so we would like. That bothers me about the whole thing surrounding the contract, the way politicians have been dealing with it, the way many citizens think of it as well. When you raise objections, they would say, they would think like, you don't want progress to happen. But what progress are you talking about, right? So I think we have to be very sober about it. Fred mentioned the giving away of so much in one go. That bothers me very much as well, because we have given up any competitive advantages we would have had any. So you're talking about the value, yes, in terms of what is written right now, based on all the analyses that would have been put out by various organizations. It seems like we're getting the short end of the stick. But none of those analyses that as far as I can recall, took into consideration the number of blocks we put on the single license and what would have happened if we did it the right way, how that would affect the value. And so those are some of the things that worry me about the contract, and the perspective I provided there about the wealth for future generations and so forth would be in the back of my mind when I address issues about the contract.
Thank you for that perspective there, Dr. Thomas. Mr. Kosiel, I know that you're also a very staunch advocate on the need for Guyana to get what it deserves, what it rightfully deserves from its oil resources. And I know that you also have some passionate views on the Yellowtail project. But before I get to that, I would just, as an introduction, love to hear what are your thoughts on the arrangement that we have with ExxonMobil and its partners, and your thoughts in the context of it being International Anti-Corruption Day.
Yeah. So let me just talk about the unfair share, and I'll use some specific numbers.
Sure.
Global Witness had released a report in January 2020, and it talked about Guyana losing 55 billion US on 8 billion barrels of oil at the time. Okay, so now we know that it pulled that report a few months ago. But when it pulled that report, it said it stood by the fiscal model, etc., the financial modeling. We at OGGN do have a copy of that financial modeling, etc., and so we updated that. We updated our model, used that as a base, and for our calculations, we used 10 billion barrels of oil, which is what is confirmed by the government of Guyana now, that there's at least 10 billion barrels of oil in the Starbuck block. And we're using a price of $80 US. The reason why is you will notice over the last few months, the price of Brent crude, which is the light sweet crude that we have, that has been fluctuating and touching around $80, going over $80, coming back. And we looked at, some reports by various investment banks and big U.S. Investment banks that predict that the oil might go over $100 a barrel in a year or two. The reason for that is there's been a lot of shift away from oil investments. So from 2014, there's not been a lot of investments in oil. Okay, so we used 10 billion barrels of oil, $80 US a barrel. We updated those calculations, and our number shows based on that we're gonna, if we update the Global Witness base report, we're losing about US $91 billion. Okay, and that's in terms of what we would call a fair contract, where we're in the middle of the pack. So what is a fair contract? In that same Global Witness report, they looked at about 67 oil regimes around the world, okay? And they looked at the total revenue from those regimes, and it ranges, the total take of those oil regimes, it ranges around 65 to 85%, okay? Now, I'll come back to something Fred was talking about in terms of the ring fencing. Ring fencing is, we have 20 projects in the Starbuck block, okay? Lisa 1 is the first one. Lisa 2 is approved, but it's not producing yet. We have Lisa Payara, which was a third well, that was approved last year. And Yellowtail, which is the fourth well that the government seems to want to push through.
Yes.
For approval, right? So those projects, because of the lack of ring fencing, so there are 20 successful oil finds just in the Starbuck block. But because of the lack of ring fencing, the expenses, all those drilling for the 21st, 22nd, whatever future wells they're drilling in the Starbuck block to find more oil, they're coming back on top of Lisa 1, right? So we've been producing oil in Lisa 1 since December 2019. And what's happening is, because those expenses are coming back because of the lack of ring fencing onto Lisa 1, we're getting 14.5% or less, right, of that oil revenue. And then you compare that to 67 oil regimes around the world, and they're getting between 65 to 85%. And on the first one, we're getting such a low percentage, it seems ridiculous. So one of our goals in OGGN is to ask to use Yellowtail as leverage to get a fair contract, because we find this this whole contract, as Dr. Troy Thomas has talked about and Fred has alluded to, there are illegal issues, etc. in there. But just looking at the financial terms, coming back to your first question around the unfair share, to us, giving up US $91 billion, that's about 467,000 US per family of 4 in Guyana. The average worker in Guyana earns about 4,000 US, right? They will never earn for their family $467,000 if you think about it in their lifetime. So how can we say we're giving up this amount of money?
Indeed. So, you mentioned something really interesting, and that brings me to my next question, which has to do with the pace of exploration. And the pace of exploration has us uncovering a lot of gas, and it's also taking a lot of money, or monies that should have been extracted individually if we had the ring fencing provision. Now that burden is being carried on the back of the Lisa Phase 1 project. Now, with that said, we have seen the government set that the depletion policy that we've been asking for, many members in civil society have been asking for, a depletion policy that really sets the tone from the Guyana perspective of how fast we want to have these discoveries or what's not. Do you think that the pace at which we're going is way beyond our capabilities? Are you concerned about how fast ExxonMobil is being allowed to continue its operations out there. What are your thoughts on that? And I'd like to start with Mr. Collins, and then I'll go to Dr. Thomas.
Okay, let me first point out that we at TIGI never represent ourselves as experts on these kinds of matters. What we do is we zero in to specific aspects and also the general pictures we can, and we do our research. Now, when you mention the depletion policy, I think you're carrying me into deep water there, if you don't mind the pun. But what I can tell you in terms of the general question you asked, the pace at which the things are going, I can tell you that there seems to have been a deliberate effort. This is why the word hustle is not inappropriate at all that Troy has used. There seems to have been a deliberate policy of making sure that things happen so fast that there is no opportunity for too much of proper planning and recovery from any errors. No, make sure that everything happens as fast as possible. For example, sometime in 2018, I think it was, there was a visitor either from Ghana or Uganda. I think it was Ghana. And he made the point that we needed to put several things in place, including a bid system, things like that. And it took time to do that. It was obvious. Now, I don't know that we needed somebody from Ghana to tell us that. For example, we have made such a complicated issue out of whether we should have a national oil company. The only reason why we could not see it making sense to have our own national oil company is because there were little demons whispering foolishness in our ears. And the role of leadership is to be able to screen out foolishness and arrive at what makes sound policy. Yesterday, I was privileged to be at an online meeting with Guyana and Suriname, which we were invited by one Mr. Deacon, who is head
Mr.
of
Archer Deacon, yes.
Oil Down, no less. And you know that they have a particular orientation in terms of representing the business interests and so on. But I found the information useful. And in that meeting, it was pointed out that it is not only our Surinamese brothers who understood that there was need for a national oil company, but even one of the presenters, he said clearly there ought to be expertise in a particular area, located in a particular, if not in your own oil company, at the university. Now, what genius does it take to realize that you have to have expertise developed in order to be able to negotiate with these oil majors? They have been in it before we were born, and they have accumulated knowledge. Suriname has a university, Anton de Kom, at which, fortunately for them, they have been teaching petroleum. And so they have the expertise to speak to these people. What genius would it have taken for our leadership to realize that we have to locate that expert? We have to get it, locate it in a particular organization or agency of government or the university or somewhere, but best an oil company, because what you want is that your oil company, like Petrobras or one of the others, must be able to partner with these guys so they know what's going on. So they are expert, and they are toe to toe with these people looking after your interests, so they can't fool you with foolishness. What genius does it take to know that? We have made simple things so complicated. So I agree with you. The speed with which we are going is a speed that bespeaks a hustle.
Okay. Thank you very much for that input, Mr. Collins. Dr. Thomas, I am not sure if you are aware, but the Vice President, Dr. Barajagdio, actually defended Guyana's position earlier this year with regard to the pace at which ExxonMobil is moving. The government is actually in support of that. And essentially his position is that, you know what, we have a very short window, a very narrow window within which to exploit our resources and get the most from it. Because if we take the decision to just leave it in the ground, then we're essentially allowing other nations such as the US and Russia and China to become even bigger monopolies on the international market. Do you think that that is a justifiable or reasonable explanation for what you see taking place in Guyana?
A short answer for me on that would be no.
Okay.
We don't have the systems in place. It seems like we need to update regulations, legal framework, and all of that. And we have to understand that we're doing this in that context. And so attempting to exploit the resources to the maximum means that we're likely to lose that much more. And in the absence, in that void, where you don't have appropriate legislation, appropriate regulations, appropriate capacity and mechanisms in place to do your monitoring and reporting and sanctioning and so forth, I am scared about the scale of corruption that can occur. Even in countries that have systems in place, have oil company, like a national oil company and all of that, you hear of things happening. Not so long ago, was it Jamaica or Trinidad? I'm a little bit foggy on that one now, where they had some issues. And then look at our situation. So on the one hand, I'm hearing about a small window to exploit the resources, but I'm wondering who is gaining as we hurry and do that. There's another side to the issue, which I don't think is so much a TIGI issue. So maybe you can charge this one to my account. I think given why we have a short window to exploit petroleum is because we recognize the problems that pose for the environmental health and the health of everyone. And so the logic of exploiting it maximally within a window doesn't resonate with me on a certain level. The issue is that the more we put into the environment, the more destructive it will be for us in the future and our children and grandchildren. I can't speak about intergenerational justice as it relates to the value that we might get from petroleum and ignore it when we talk about what we're doing to the environment at the same time. And that's why I feel from a personal standpoint, I have to balance that. So for me, I'm interested in at what point do we stop? At what point enough is enough? Are we going to keep running away and doing this indefinitely? Can we sit back and calculate what we have, see what we need for but again, we got to fix other issues like what we're getting from what we do have. So that concerns me on that level. And I just can't, from a personal standpoint, fathom the argument about doing this because others have done it or are doing. I think we all need to, across the world, around the world, address it. But I can't fathom the argument for doing it, knowing how destructive it will be to humans and all other living creatures on Earth. Because others have done it. That argument honestly does not make any sense to me. It doesn't resonate with me at all, because we cannot agree mutually to continue to, I wanted to use a strong term, but to jeopardize our future well-being in terms of the environment that we live in. I don't think it just doesn't make sense for us to agree around the world to continue to do that and to race to do it as well. So that's a personal side of the argument for me.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Mr. Kusiel, I'd like to rephrase the question a bit for you, given what you've heard from Mr. Collins and Dr. Thomas. You said earlier that we're actually leaving $91 billion on the table because of the arrangement that we have with ExxonMobil for the Stavro block. And we've seen the government note that it's going to throw in another project, which is the gas to shore, that can very well be over $1 billion US. Now, when you take that into consideration, the fact that we've not been able to carry out the requisite audits of the pre-contract costs, as well as the cost for LISA 1 and LISA 2, when you look at that, as well as the pace that we're moving offshore with the continuing of the discoveries and what's not, how concerned are you with the predicament that we're putting ourselves in?
Okay. So I'm going to use an example,
Sure.
I think, to illustrate my position. So let's say, you're building a house, and you hire a contractor to come build a house. And first you said, okay, I'm going to fence around the house. So I'm going to have the contractor come and fence around the house. Okay. And then you notice, wait a second, this contractor appears to be overcharging me, etc. You wouldn't go and say, okay, go start building the house, right? And to me, the pre-contract cost is where from 1999 to 2015, it's pointed out that 460 million pre-contract costs, just using Chris Ram using the financial statements from the oil companies themselves. He pointed out that, hey, that was overstated by $92 million, okay? So then the government in December 2019 started an audit of that pre-contract cost, okay? LISA 1 and LISA 2 was already approved, okay, fine, by then, right? But Payara was not approved, right? So you have a problem, and they're just starting pre-contract costs, you have a problem, you caught them with their own financial statements, and the government says, okay, late last year, fall of last year, approved Payara, okay, we give them a pass on that, let's say. But now, why are you rushing to approve Yellowtail? You have the pre-contract cost report, which is apparently it's finished, but why isn't the government releasing that report to the people, etc.? No one has seen that report. It's 2 years. Chris Ram pointed out the issue with the pre-contract costs since 2018, right? So why is it taking so long, and why are you rushing to approve other projects, right? You have not finished the LISA 1, and just remember with LISA 1, the capital cost initially was US $4.4 billion. Then Dr. Mangal pointed out, and others pointed out some issues, and it dropped by 700 million US, okay? And then it eventually landed at 3.5 billion US for LISA 1 capital cost. LISA 2 capital cost is about $6 billion, right? We have done comparison like on a per barrel comparison, and you can see LISA 2, we know the break-even cost is about $25 a barrel, which is much cheaper than LISA 1. But if you take on the capital cost, if you look at the numbers, it makes no sense. On a capital cost basis, LISA 2 is more expensive. So why are you rushing to this Ford project called Yellowtail? There were a lot of questions. There was a EPA session recently, a few weeks back, on Yellowtail. There were a lot of questions asked. there's some of the questions are very concerning about radioactive material coming onshore in Guyana. And those questions still remain outstanding. So why the rush to approve Yellowtail? And I think the date is December the 15th for the EPA submissions. And then we're expecting Yellowtail to be approved soon after. So why is this rush? This makes no sense to me. We should say, hey, let's get our house in order before we approve Yellowtail. And I want to talk a little bit to the point about you asked earlier about the pace and the depletion policy, right?
Yes.
So my view is a little bit different. So I talked about since 2014, there have not been a lot of investment, at least in the private oil companies, in exploration, etc. But the world population keeps increasing, right? You still have places like China and India where 60% of their electricity is still based on coal, right? So these countries are still investing in coal, etc. And the thing about you're telling me that I think the government had said, hey, we need to rush because in 10 years there'll be no more oil, etc. You can see the recent spike in the oil prices because you can't rush. There's like millions and tens of hundreds of millions of homes here in North America and Europe heated by natural gas, electricity supplied by gas, etc., oil, etc. So that transition doesn't happen in 10 years. That's why you see a lot of these countries talking about 2050. And there is one thing about yes, burning the oil. I see climate change here in Canada. Yes, burning the oil is dangerous in terms of pollution, etc. But transportation, etc., is just 15% of that overall pie, right? I mean, look at the chair you're sitting on. If you go to the hospital and you're getting treatment, etc., what are the syringes made of, etc.? There are other uses of oil other than burning and damaging the environment, right? And so I guess what I'm saying in terms of this rush, let's rush and do everything in 10 years. That makes no sense to me, especially when you see all these oil prices going up because there's not a lot of supply coming on board, right? And we have one of the lowest price per barrel in the world in terms of extraction, right? So Venezuela can compete with us. Their oil extraction is much more, the price is much heavier, the break-even is much heavier. They have they don't have the light sweet crude like us, etc. We're one of the lowest in terms of break-even costs. So I don't understand, I don't understand this rush when you have 9.5 billion US in Lisa 1 and Lisa 2 remaining unaudited. And when we originally compared Lisa 1 to Lisa 2, we can just show by simple math, just doing the averages, that there's some serious discrepancy. So, and we had stated recently, we think things, looking at the pre-contract costs, looking at comparing the capital costs across the various projects, things might be overstated by 25%. And that could be like a normal padding that they put in just initially, right? And then, if we push back, then they would reduce it. But why are we rushing when we have all these questions?
Thank you, Mr. Kusiel. So given everything that we've put on the table this evening, I'd like to head into the concluding aspect of our program tonight. And on that note, I'd like to start with Mr. Collins. And the question I have for you is, what are some of the crucial areas you believe the government ought to pay attention to improve transparency and accountability in the governance of the oil and gas sector? And what's your message for civil society as we head to the close of 2021?
Just to clarify, then you said close. I was wondering about the time. How much time do we have left on this program?
So we have about roughly 20 minutes. So I'm giving each speaker adequate time.
I was just wondering. I thought that is where you were heading. Okay, as we go to the close of 2021, we at TIGI want to convey to our fellow citizens that the management of a country, especially in complex areas like these, is not a spectator sport. It is not like cricket or basketball where you sit on your couch and you cheer. We are doing worse than that. Many of us are not saying anything. We are not cheering anything. We're simply going about our business and leaving matters. And we need to understand, too, my message, too, is that a country cannot be cheering for its young students, having all of these bright people that we're producing. Guyana produces some of the brightest people in the world. Why are we rejoicing every year when so many of our children do well? And at a time like this, when we need the brains, we're not using them. What sense does that make? Do you have to bring a consultant from outside to tell you what is before your eyes? So one of the problems we have is that we have invested in our people. We have companies that we have invested in, and they are being excluded. Why? Go on the net and you will see a Chronicle article about the GNIC, how much shipbuilding they have been doing for how many years since Proston, and which in the private sector is using their dockyards. But guess what? We have a solution that has been floated for gas, and that solution seems to have been arrived at without any consideration that we have a company like GNIC that we can use because of its background, its history, it must be part of the local content mix. Whereas in Suriname, as it turns out, we have Anton de Kom University, as I said, where they have invested and they are able to bring to bear their expertise in order to help the country. What do? Where we have managed to have invested, we are not bringing them to the table. Everything must be done from a foreign standpoint. There must have been something indeed in our conditioning that makes us prone to look for solutions outside, even when we have a history of solutions using our local talents. The Demerara Harbor Bridge. Thanks to Murray House Trust presentation made me to know, because I never paid it any mind, that it was a local engineer who was and local talent that put that bridge together. It has lasted for more than the 25 years, by more than half, and it is still going, and it is being repaired using our own local skills. So when you have this kind of track record, one would have thought that you're looking inside before you go outside. And even when you go outside, you try to make sure your solution includes our people, because what is happening now, as you can see, is that there is another kind of rush around the world, not in Guyana, but it's certainly affected us, which is to robotize everything, automate everything. So what are you going to do for your people? Where are they going to work? Where are all the people going to work? We have to have a vision that has in its ambit all of these considerations. So that's number one, look at our local situation, where you're going to get the jobs, how you're going to salvage the investment that we have made in our people, in our companies and their reputation. And now where Dr. Thomas was pointing out just now, we have a slight difference in our approach. I think we at TIGI feel that this matter of how do you jump off one horse and onto another is a complex thing. We are saying that the gas to shore and the movement away from fossil fuel must be as part of a transition strategy. We believe that the gas can be used. Well, all you have to do is going into the air right now anyhow. It's simply being flared. So using it makes sense. Now, I don't know that it makes sense in a pipeline. We had a meeting the other day that showed, and it was in the news, what the disadvantages. But in terms of the whether we are going to leave it in the ground or not, I understand the government's views that clearly there are other countries that are not paying any mind to leaving anything in the ground. They are in a race. I saw Mexico having tons of bid rounds, and that was earlier this year. I saw, etc., etc. So they are not leaving anything in the ground. So Guyana has to understand that to a certain extent, what the government's position is in that regard certainly rings true. But again, that doesn't mean that you're going to be in such a hurry that you don't even audit your expenses. What sense does that make? You're in a hurry to give away the money? Is that what you're in a hurry for? So we have to understand the complex demands and in the situation in which we live. The part about coal is a serious one, which I wouldn't but I understand perfectly the point that is being made. And so we are not saying that there is no virtue in that position, but that is what governments are there for, to make complex decisions for the benefit of the people. And one has to be able to match the task that is before one. And if you can't do that, then we have a serious problem. So we believe that yes, and governments want to deliver. Governments are under pressure to deliver before the next election cycle. That is the reality in which we're living. We understand that. And so, but gas, yes, the next message I want to tell the people of Guyana is that what I noticed at the meeting yesterday, one benefit of being at that meeting, I saw the Surinamese representative twice mention, you need a consultation which includes the trade unions. I'm not hearing that here. Your consultation must not only include the unions, it must include the fishermen. That is one thing we agree totally with our environmental colleagues. We might not agree that it must be left in the ground, but we believe that the petroleum resources, fossil fuel, must be exploited according to the constitution of the country with all safeguards being paid attention to. And finally, I know I can go on a long time on this. The laws of the land, as my colleague said, there are some things that are so ridiculous. I don't know what genius it takes. So, what is the point of upgrading laws that you don't intend to honor? Can anybody tell me, please? What sense does that make? We seem to be treating the law as a nuisance. And that is why we say the original sin has gotten us into this problem. The requirement that there be a maximum number of blocks on a single license. And we are paying the penalty for it. And the law must be constructed properly. And our message to Guyanese is that we need to pay attention. That is in our statement that we released today, that it is very important that we watch the front door. The law is the very front door at which we need to pay mind to corruption. And so that there are no loopholes and there are no weak aspects that are going to be set there just to allow corruption. So watch the laws that they intend to bring in. That's where I'm going to stop for now.
Mr. Collins, thank you very much for that comprehensive conclusion. Mr. Kosial, I'd like to invite you for your concluding remarks, particularly as it relates to your message for the government, civil society, as we head to the close of 2021, and some of the key areas that you believe we ought to pay attention to.
Okay. So in terms of one of the key areas, to me, it's the insurance, because it was published in Kaieteur News maybe last year or several months back that there was an oil spill in the Kanuku block, not the Starbuck block, in the Kanuku block. And I think Dr. Vincent Adams at the time talked about that spill could be as massive as the BP oil spill. And BP had to end up, just BP itself.
Okay. Just a quick clarification there. I believe that was a mud spill, and he said that it could have been, had they not contained the situation as quickly as possible. He was scared about what it could have become. But I do take your point, too. Please continue.
Yes. So that cost BP itself US $62 billion. That would bankrupt Guyana. Right now, we still don't know. We have asked many times. We don't know what is the insurance policy around Lisa 1, Lisa 2, Payara, or the soon probably to be approved Yellowtail. So shouldn't that be one of the first things we should be concerned about instead of rushing to approve other projects, right? In terms of coming back to the topic on the laws, etc., I am hopeful, because looking at what Dr. Troy Thomas did with the EPA for Lisa 1 and Lisa 2, bringing the term down from the legal 20 years to the 5 years, that is hopeful that we can enforce our laws, like 60 blocks versus 600 blocks, right? So that gives me hope. Those things can be corrected. And we have, yes, we don't have all the laws, but we have laws right now that that should be enforced, right? And if we start enforcing those laws, etc., at least maybe we can start getting something reasonable. And one thing I would like to talk on this topic is the taxes. Is the Minister of Natural Resources is paying taxes on behalf of the oil companies, right? How is that legal? Because the oil companies didn't pay any taxes. So why is the Minister of Natural Resources writing these oil companies a tax receipt? And are they taking that tax receipt? And if they're based in the US, are they getting a tax refund because of this tax receipt, right? So how is that legal? And is that legal to our laws? And one of the points here also is the stability clause that the government keeps talking about. How can a minister in the government, Minister of Natural Resources, sign a document that locks all future Guyanese governments into a contract that cannot be changed, right? This seems unconstitutional. Right, so they are, but as I said, there are hopes. There are people like Dr. Troy Thomas today, etc., who are stepping up and showing. So we need more Guyanese to step up. The government talks about the sanctity of contracts, but we point back to the U.S. Just look at the U.S. over the last few years. The Paris Climate Change Agreement, they pulled out of it. The free trade agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. that was signed in the mid-1990s, they broke it, and they formed a new agreement in 2020. Oh, why this agreement is unfair? So one thing for us, the government keeps talking about sanctity of contract, stability clause, etc., but we have a simple question. The contract allows the government to go to the oil companies and ask, hey, can we get a fair deal? Has the government done that on behalf of the Guyanese people, especially the 30% of people that are living on $2 a day?
That is a very interesting question to end on, indeed. And Dr. Thomas, given what you've heard, the perspectives of your colleagues, I'd invite you now to provide your concluding arguments, your concluding statements on some of the issues that we need to fix as we come to the close of 2021 and approach 2022. What are some key issues you want to see the PPPC government address, and what's your message for a civil society individuals who want to know more about oil and gas, who are concerned about the governance of the sector?
Thank you. I wanted to say something in support of what Fred mentioned.
Sure.
When he reiterated the issue about the number of blocks in the single license. I think it's important to repeat every time we say this, because I've heard many people allude to ministerial discretion in the law. And one thing we haven't said here tonight is that there is nothing like unfettered discretion. And a court will not uphold unfettered discretion. It's nonsense to establish a law and have a clause within the law that invalidates the law or makes it so that the law does not matter. That could never have been the intent. And I would like to say that to my friends out there who will allude to ministerial discretion. As we go forward, we have this situation that we have. We do need to take steps to get it addressed. But whenever there are large economic ventures, there are greater opportunities for grand corruption. And we have to address those opportunities to the extent that we can. It means that we should not continue in the way we are going at the moment. And one of the key things that need to happen is we need to do independent monitoring of what is going on in the petroleum sector. We as Guyanese should not be taking the word of petroleum companies about what is happening. We need to have our independent mechanisms to do what we need to do. And our organizations that have responsibilities in those areas need to get the resources to set up the state-of-the-art systems that they need to do that work. For example, we've been hearing recently speculation about oil spills. Our agencies need the resources to set up what they need to set up to be on the ball with those things. So when we criticize it, we're not criticizing the people working at those agencies. We're saying if they can't do it, it's a problem, and that problem needs to be fixed. And if you're asking me something that I want to say to the government that needs to be addressed, and urgently, it is that our EPA and other organizations responsible for monitoring what's happening in the oceans need the resources to set up what they need to set up. And Guyanese should seriously think about that and talk to your political representatives. Press them to get that done. It's absolutely essential if we are going to keep our eyes on corruption and ensuring that we get whatever little we have in the contract that we're going to take from the petroleum sector, notwithstanding the fact we need to be fighting to get the contract itself addressed. We need open data for petroleum and open data in general. Citizens need to know what's going on in the petroleum sector. That information does not belong to the government and is not the property of the oil company. They're not, and when I say government, I mean whoever is in office. They're not, it's not a private arrangement between the people in office and the oil companies. It's an arrangement on behalf of the citizens. How is it the citizens can be privy to what's going on? And we have to stop making this excuse about resources. To do it, we have to do it. It's an imperative in my view. And if we're going to assure people that corruption is not happening, we got to be able to demonstrate that it's not happening. And so I want to press those 2 points about our ability to monitor and the ability of our agencies to monitor, and about the availability of data. TIGI has requested data on the oil sector and has not been able to get the data. Why is that happening? That really needs to be addressed. Our citizens need to play a more active role in governance. Over the years, we have not to the extent that we should, but the gravity of petroleum and what it can actually do for the country really demands that citizens step up to the plate and become engaged. And I want to urge my Guyanese friends to really do that. It's your right as a citizen, it's your duty as a citizen, and make your voices heard. I also think, given all that we have said about the oil contract and what it is, we need to have an investigation about what happened, and perhaps something like a commission of inquiry might be relevant for something like this. We really need, as Guyanese, to have all the facts about what happened and the decisions that were made, so that we know where we came from, where we're going, what we can do about it. There needs to be enforcement of the EPA Act. We're talking about radioactive substances coming on shore. We're talking about rushing various arrangements. We really need to pay attention to the implementation of the EPA Act, and where there are resource issues. Again, the scale of what we're doing now is too large for us to sit back and let things go as they were going before. And those are the final things I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas, Mr. Kusiel, and Mr. Collins. I'd like to thank you once again for providing us with your enlightening views. I know that the listeners, wherever they may be tonight, and our viewers on Facebook Live were definitely given a lot to think about with respect to reflections on some of the challenges that we have to face and we are facing with the Stabroek Block Production Sharing Agreement, and some of the key issues that we still need to pay keen attention to. So thank you again for your insightful perspectives, and I do hope that we can have you back on the program for a part 2 before the close of the year, because definitely this is a good discussion that is going to be ongoing, as governance of the sector really is a matter that we all need to pay attention to. So gentlemen, thank you very much, and do have a good evening.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you.